Victal had been having a perfectly boring shift until the alarms decided to ruin his afternoon. The security console lit up like a festival display, except instead of celebrating, it was screaming bloody murder about potential catastrophic threats on Observation Deck 7. Red lights, blaring sirens, the works. Victal, who had spent the last 2 hours reviewing inventory reports for stun batons, nearly fell out of his chair. "What in the name of the 12 suns?" he muttered, his three-fingered hands flying across the haptic interface. The biometric scanner results made his blood run cold. Well, colder. His species did not exactly run hot to begin with. Alert, alert. Apex predator cub signatures detected. Threat level, extreme. Aggressive territorial displays in progress, vocalizations. Registering at predator frequency range. Immediate containment recommended. Victal read the report twice, then a third time, because surely the sensors had malfunctioned. They had not. The data was clear, conclusive, and absolutely terrifying. 2 separate heat signatures, both small, both moving with the chaotic energy patterns typical of juvenile apex predators. The acoustic sensors had picked up roaring, actual roaring, on a diplomatic space station in the middle of a Tuesday. How did apex predator cubs get onto this station? Victal asked the empty room, as if the walls might provide answers. They did not. He slammed his hand on the emergency communication panel. "BIP, get to security command now. We have a situation." 30 seconds later, BIP came skittering through the door, his thin limbs moving in that peculiar Quellen gallop that always reminded Victal of a startled insect. BIP's large eyes, already naturally bulbous, looked ready to pop right out of his skull. "Sir, what is happening? Are we under attack? Did the Thravaxian delegation bring weapons? I told you they looked suspicious." "Worse," Victal said grimly, pulling up the sensor data on the main display screen. "We have cubs." BIP stared at the screen, then at Victal, then back at the screen. "Cubs, sir? Apex predator cubs." Victal emphasized each word like he was teaching a particularly slow student. "Observation Deck 7, displaying aggressive territorial behavior. Listen to this." He played the audio file. A sound erupted from the speakers that could only be described as a miniature roar. High-pitched, certainly, but unmistakably predatory. It was followed by another roar, slightly different in tone. Then what sounded like rapid footfalls. Then giggling. Wait, giggling? That sounds like, BIP hesitated, his translator chip working overtime. Laughter? "Predators laugh before they kill," Victal said with absolute confidence, despite having no evidence whatsoever to support this claim. "It is a psychological tactic. Disarm your prey, make them think you are harmless, then strike." BIP looked unconvinced, but he was not about to argue with his superior officer during a crisis. "What did... we do, sir?" Victal pulled up the station protocols, page after page of regulations, emergency procedures, and contingency plans scrolled past. Finally, he found the relevant section, Protocol 447B, Unexpected Predator Presence. The instructions were clear. Lock down the affected area. Assemble a containment team. Approach with extreme caution. Tranquilize if necessary. Contact the Xenobiology Department. Do not, under any circumstances, attempt to pet them. That last part seemed oddly specific, but Victal was not about to question regulations written by people smarter than him. "All right," he said, standing up and grabbing his tactical vest from the equipment locker. "We go in prepared, full protective gear, stun weapons on standby. We contain the situation before those cubs hurt someone or themselves." "Should we evacuate the surrounding decks?" BIP asked, already pulling on his own vest. It hung loosely on his thin frame. "No, we do not want to cause a panic. The last thing we need is station-wide hysteria about loose predators." Victal checked his weapon, fully charged. "We keep this quiet, professional, by the book." He pulled up the deck schematic. Observation Deck 7 was a popular recreational area, featuring a massive transparent aluminum window that looked out onto the star field. Beautiful view, romantic even, also apparently currently occupied by baby predators. "Who else is in that section?" Victal asked, zooming in on the deck layout. BIP checked his datapad. "According to the registry, there's a human intern named Pax supervising the temporary childcare area. Victal's dual heart sank. Childcare? There are children in there with the predators? It appears so, sir. By the ancestors, Victal breathed. We need to move. Now. He grabbed the emergency comm unit. This is Security Officer Victal to all available personnel. Code Orange. I repeat, Code Orange. Observation Deck 7. Potential danger to civilians. Tactical team. Suit up and meet me at the security elevator in 2 minutes. Within 90 seconds, 4 additional officers had assembled. They were a mixed species bunch. Grix, a hulking Thendorian with arms like tree trunks. Lysa, a Valorian female whose species evolved from ambush hunters and therefore knew a thing or two about predators. Finn, a human male from Earth, which was ironic in ways Victal would only appreciate later. And Kodo, a quadrupedal Antillian who served as their tracking specialist. Here is the situation, Victal began, projecting the sensor data onto the wall. 2 apex predator cubs, unknown species, displaying territorial aggression, civilians present, we go in carefully, weapons on stun setting only, nobody plays hero, nobody tries to be friends with the wildlife. We tranquilize, contain, and sort out how they got here later. Questions? Finn raised his hand. Sir, what kind of predator cubs are we talking about? Because the audio sounds kind of like... Does it matter? Victal interrupted. A predator is a predator. Now gear up. We leave in 30 seconds. The team moved with practiced efficiency. Helmets, gloves, stun batons, tranquilizer guns, protective shields. Victal felt slightly ridiculous gearing up for cubs, but regulations were regulations. Better to be overprepared than underprepared and missing appendages. They moved through the corridors in tactical formation. Station residents pressed themselves against the walls, sensing something serious was happening. Victal appreciated their cooperation. The last thing he needed was curious onlookers getting in the way. As they approached Observation Deck 7, the sounds became clearer. Roaring. Definitely roaring. But also, and this is what confused Victal, squealing, happy squealing. The kind of noise young creatures made when playing, not when establishing dominance or defending territory. Stay sharp, he whispered to his team. Predators are clever. This could be a trap. Bip, standing beside him, looked like he might vomit. A trap, sir? Set by cubs? Never underestimate nature, Victal replied sagely, having absolutely no idea what he was talking about. He placed his hand on the door control panel. Beyond this door lay danger, possibly injury, definitely a lot of paperwork. He took a deep breath, said a quick prayer to the gods of middle management, and pressed the button. The door slid open with a soft hiss. And that is when Victal saw them. 2 tiny humans, barely knee-high, standing in front of the observation window, roaring at their own reflections like they were facing down the universe's greatest enemies. Victal froze. His entire tactical team froze. 6 fully armed security officers dressed for combat, staring at 2 toddlers in colorful jumpsuits. "Rair!" screamed the smaller one, a female with dark curly hair tied up in 2 puffs on her head. She had her hands raised like claws, her face scrunched up in what she clearly thought was a terrifying expression. It was, objectively, adorable. "Roar!" responded her reflection. She jumped back, startled, then immediately roared again, louder this time. The other tiny human, a male with lighter hair sticking up in every direction, was not roaring. He was banging his palms against the window, leaving little handprints on the glass, giggling maniacally at the baby in the reflection who was also banging and giggling. "Tactical situation?" Bip whispered, his voice cracking. "I have no idea," Victal admitted. Sitting on the floor about 3 meters away, completely unbothered by the commotion, was a young human male. Pax, according to the registry. He looked maybe 20 standard years old. He was building a tower out of colorful blocks, humming to himself. "Excuse me," Victal called out, trying to sound authoritative despite the absurdity of the situation. "We received reports of aggressive predator activity." Pax looked up, noticed the 6 armed officers in full tactical gear, and blinked, slowly. "Oh, hey. Yeah, the twins are just playing. They discovered the mirror thing." He gestured vaguely at the window. "Pretty funny, right?" "Funny," Victal repeated. "Funny? The station sensors detected apex predator behavior, territorial aggression, threat vocalizations." "Oh, that," Pax shrugged. Yeah, Luca and Nina like to roar. They saw it in a video about lions last week. Now they roar at everything. Breakfast, roar. Nap time, roar. Their own reflection, super big roars. The female twin, Nina apparently, had noticed the new arrivals. She turned away from her reflection, locked eyes with Victal, and let out her biggest roar yet. Then she grinned, showing about 8 teeth total, and waddled toward him with her arms outstretched. "Oh no," Victal said, taking a step back. "Oh no, no, no." "Up, up," Nina demanded, reaching for his legs. Grix, the massive Thendorian officer, started laughing, deep belly laughs that echoed through the observation deck. "Sir, we mobilized a tactical response for babies." "They are apex predator babies," Victal protested, even as Nina grabbed onto his leg and tried to climb him like a tree. "Human babies, from Earth, the death world." Luca had abandoned his reflection and was now walking toward Finn, the human officer, babbling something incomprehensible. Finn, grinning widely, took off his helmet and picked up the toddler. "Hey, little guy, are you the big scary predator? Yes, you are. Yes, you are," Finn cooed, bouncing Luca on his hip. Luca roared directly into Finn's face. Finn roared back. Luca shrieked with laughter. "Traitor," Victal muttered. Nina was still attached to his leg, trying to figure out how his knee joint worked. She poked it, pulled on his uniform, roared at it. When none of these approaches worked, she looked up at him with enormous brown eyes and said the most devastating words in any language. "Up? Peas?" Bip leaned over and whispered, "Sir, I think you have to pick her up now. It is... protocol?" "That is not protocol," Victal hissed back. "Up, up, up," Nina insisted, bouncing on her toes. Lysa, the Valorian officer, had her communication device out and was clearly recording this entire disaster. "For the security files," she said innocently. Victal knew she was absolutely going to show this to everyone in the department. With great reluctance and zero dignity remaining, Victal reached down and picked up Nina. She immediately grabbed his face with both hands and examined him with great interest. "Bug," she declared. "I am not a bug," Victal said stiffly. "I am a Ventaxian." "Bug," Nina repeated cheerfully, patting his head. From across the room, Pax called out, "Sorry, should have mentioned. They are in the naming phase. Everything is either bug, dog, or ball. You are definitely bug-shaped from their perspective." "This is humiliating," Victal muttered. Nina roared directly into his ear, then giggled, then roared again. The sound of rapid footsteps in the corridor announced the arrival of someone moving with purpose. The door slid open again, and a human woman in a diplomatic uniform rushed in, her expression a mixture of concern and barely suppressed amusement. "I got the security alert," she said, slightly breathless. "What exactly is the emergency involving my children?" Victal, still holding Nina, who was now trying to count his head ridges with her tiny fingers, felt his dignity shrivel up and die. "Diplomat Arya, I can explain." "Please do," Arya said, crossing her arms. Her lips were twitching. She was definitely fighting a smile. The biometric sensors detected what appeared to be apex predator cubs displaying aggressive territorial behavior. Victal began, his voice formal, despite the tiny human currently attempting to see if his antennae were removable. They were not, but Nina was testing the theory anyway. Roaring was confirmed through audio analysis. Rapid movement patterns suggested potential threat escalation. I mobilized a tactical response team according to Protocol 447B, Unexpected Predator Presence. Arya looked around at the 6 heavily armed officers, their weapons, their shields, their tactical gear. Then she looked at her 2 babies. Luca was still in Finn's arms, chewing on his own hand. Nina had given up on Victal's antenna and was now fascinated by the texture of his uniform collar. "You assembled a tactical team," Arya said slowly. "For toddlers?" "Human toddlers," Victal corrected, as if this justified everything. "From a Class 12 death world. They are 18 months old." "Apex predators start training young," Victal insisted. The roaring was clearly practice for future hunting behavior. The reflection engagement demonstrated early territorial awareness. The rapid movement patterns indicated developing pack coordination skills. Arya pressed her fingers to her temples. "Victal, they were not practicing hunting. They discovered mirrors. Do you know what mirrors are?" "Of course I know what mirrors are," Victal said, offended. "Reflective surfaces that show one's own image." "Right. And do you know what happens when human babies see their own reflection for the first time? Victal hesitated. They recognize themselves as sentient individuals and contemplate their place in the universe. No, Arya said, her patience clearly wearing thin. They think it is another baby. They get excited. They make noises at it. Sometimes they try to play with it. Sometimes they try to intimidate it, because babies are weird and do not understand object permanence yet. What you interpreted as territorial aggression was my daughter trying to make friends with herself. Bip, still standing next to Victal, spoke up quietly. To be fair, the roaring did sound quite aggressive. They learned it from a nature documentary, Arya explained, rubbing her forehead, about lions. They thought the lions were dogs, big orange dogs. Now they roar at everything because they think it is funny. Last week, Luca roared at his breakfast. It was oatmeal, very threatening oatmeal. Grix, the Thendorian officer, was still chuckling. I like these tiny humans. They have spirit. They have volume, Victal muttered. Nina had started roaring again, this time directly at his face from point-blank range. His antenna flattened against his skull in surrender. Arya walked over and gently took Nina from Victal's arms. Nina immediately reached back toward him, opening and closing her hands. Bug! Bug, come back! I am not going anywhere, Victal assured her, though he took a careful step backward just in case. Let me explain human infant development, Arya said, settling Nina on her hip. At this age, they are learning about the world through exploration. They touch everything, taste everything. Yes, Luca, we do not eat the security officer's equipment. They make sounds constantly because they are learning language. The roaring is just them experimenting with different vocalizations. It means nothing. It registered on our threat assessment scanners, Victal protested weakly. Your scanners are not calibrated for human children, Arya pointed out. Human babies are loud. They are chaotic. They have approximately zero fear response because they have not learned what danger is yet. That is why they need constant supervision. Not because they are predators, because they are tiny disaster magnets who will absolutely try to stick their fingers in electrical outlets if you look away for 5 seconds. Lysa, the Valorian officer, had put away her recording device and was watching the twins with interest. On my world, our young are born knowing to avoid danger. How does your species survive if your babies have no survival instinct? Very carefully, Arya said dryly, and with a lot of coffee. Pax, how did they get to the observation window anyway? I thought you were keeping them in the play area. Pax looked up from his block tower, which had grown impressively tall. They wanted to see the stars. I thought it would be educational. Educational, Victal repeated. The window created a reflection. They thought they were seeing other cubs. They began displaying dominance behaviors. They were playing peekaboo with themselves, Arya corrected. It is a game, a harmless game that apparently triggered a station-wide security alert. Finn, still holding Luca, grinned. In Victal's defense, human kids can be pretty scary when you are not used to them. I have a nephew, terrifying little guy, once painted the entire bathroom with yogurt. Why? Bip asked, horrified. Because he could, Finn replied cheerfully. Kodo, the Antillean officer who had been silent until now, spoke up in his rumbling, multi-toned voice. This is a learning opportunity. We should update the security database, add parameters for identifying human juveniles versus actual threats, prevent future false alarms. That is actually an excellent idea, Arya said, looking relieved. I can provide you with information about human developmental stages, what behaviors are normal, what would actually be concerning. Because I promise you, if my twins were actually in danger or being dangerous, I would be the first to know. Nina squirmed in her mother's arms and reached toward Victal again. Bug play? I do not play, Victal said firmly. I am a security officer. Bug play, Nina insisted. Perhaps you could make an exception, Bip suggested, for diplomatic relations. Victal glared at his second-in-command. Traitor. By the time Victal finished filing his incident report 3 hours later, the story had already spread through the entire station like a plasma fire through ventilation shafts. He knew this because when he walked into the security break room, every single officer present stopped talking and looked at him. Then Grix started making roaring noises, baby roaring noises, high-pitched and absolutely ridiculous, coming from a 2-meter-tall Thendorian. Very funny, Victal said flatly, pouring himself a cup of kava. He needed the caffeine equivalent. It had been a long day. Did the tiny Death World predators accept your surrender? Lysa asked innocently, not looking up from her datapad. I did not surrender. I conducted a proper security assessment and determined the situation was non-threatening. After you picked one of them up and let her call you Bug, Finn added helpfully. She is a child. Children say nonsensical things. She roared in your face and you just stood there and took it, Grix said, grinning widely. I have the footage. Lisa sent it to everyone. You are famous now. Victal closed his eyes and counted to 10 in 3 different languages. It was a misunderstanding. The sensors misidentified normal human juvenile behavior as a threat. I responded appropriately according to protocol. You mobilized a tactical team for babies, someone called from across the room. Human babies, Victal corrected for what felt like the 1,000th time. There is a difference. Is there, though? Lisa looked up, her angular features arranged in an expression of genuine curiosity. Because, from what diplomat Arya explained, human babies are actually quite vulnerable. Helpless, even. They cannot walk properly, cannot feed themselves, cannot regulate their own body temperature effectively. If anything, they are the opposite of threatening. They are from Earth, Victal said, as if this explained everything. Earth is classified as a Class 12 death world. Everything from Earth is dangerous. Finn is from Earth, Bip pointed out. Finn waved cheerfully. Finn is trained. Finn has survival skills. Those babies just have volume and chaos. And yet, Grix said, leaning forward with a gleam in his eye, you were terrified. I was not terrified. I was cautious. There is a difference. A notification pinged on Victal's personal device. He pulled it up, hoping for something work-related. Instead, it was a message from Station Sue. Command! His supervisor, Administrator Thane, wanted to see him. Immediately. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Victal drained his kava and headed for the administrative offices, ignoring the continued laughter from his colleagues. He would never live this down. 20 years of exemplary service, commendations, awards, successful security operations, and he would be remembered as the officer who declared war on toddlers. Administrator Thane's office was located on Deck 3 with a window overlooking the docking bay. She was a tall, elegant Theresian with silver skin and the kind of calm demeanor that came from dealing with bureaucratic nonsense for decades. When Victal entered, she gestured to a chair without looking up from her desk display. Sit. He sat. She finished whatever she was reading, then finally turned her attention to him. Her expression was unreadable. So, the incident report. Yes, Administrator. You mobilized 6 officers in full tactical gear because of 2 human infants. The sensors indicated apex predator presence. The sensors, Thane said slowly, are not sentient. They provide data. You interpret that data. You decided that data indicated a threat requiring armed response. Victal felt sweat forming on his skin ridges. The protocol clearly states, I know what the protocol states. I wrote half of those protocols. Thane leaned back in her chair. What I want to know is why, at any point during your response, you did not consider alternative explanations for the data. Such as a glitch, such as normal activity being misinterpreted, such as, I do not know, checking who was registered as present in that section before assuming we had a wildlife containment situation. She pulled up a display showing Victal's report. You saw that child care services had scheduled time on that deck. You saw that a human supervisor was present. And you still concluded predators had somehow infiltrated the station? Put like that, it did sound rather stupid. I was erring on the side of caution, Victal said carefully. You were panicking, Thane corrected, because the word human triggered your fight or flight response and you forgot basic threat assessment protocols. She sighed. Do you know how many humans live on this station, Victal? 47 registered residents. 47. Do you know how many security incidents those 47 humans have been involved in over the past year? Victal thought about it. 3? 2. Both involving excessive alcohol consumption at the recreation lounge. Both resolved peacefully. Thane folded her hands on her desk. Humans are not the rampaging monsters you seem to think they are. Yes, they come from a dangerous world. Yes, they have physical capabilities that exceed many other species. But they are also members of the galactic community. our colleagues, our friends, and in the case of diplomat Arya's children, they are babies, harmless babies who make funny noises. The roaring was quite convincing, Victal said quietly. To his surprise, Thane smiled. I heard the audio file. It was adorable. Terrifying to someone not familiar with human children, I imagine, but adorable. I have made a fool of myself. Yes, you have. Thane's bluntness was almost refreshing. But you have also identified a genuine problem with our security systems. The sensors cannot distinguish between actual threats and normal juvenile behavior for several species. That is a flaw, one that could lead to more serious incidents in the future. Victal looked up. You want me to fix it? Diplomat Arya has offered to provide educational materials about human development. I want you to work with her. Update the security database, create new parameters for the threat assessment system. Make sure this does not happen again, not just with humans, but with any species whose young might trigger false positives. It was a logical assignment. It made sense. It was also going to be incredibly embarrassing, working closely with the mother whose children had caused his tactical meltdown. Yes, Administrator. I will coordinate with Diplomat Arya. Good. Also, Thane added, her tone shifting slightly, you handled the actual situation well. Once you realized the cubs were harmless, you adapted. You did not double down on your initial assessment. You accepted new information and adjusted accordingly. That is the mark of a good officer. A great officer would not have made the initial mistake, but we cannot all be great all the time. Thank you. Victal was not sure if he had just been complimented or insulted. Possibly both. Dismissed. And Victal, try not to look so miserable. This will blow over, eventually. It did not blow over quickly. Over the next week, Victal became something of a station celebrity. People he barely knew would make roaring noises when he passed. Someone left a stuffed toy lion in his locker. The cafeteria started serving a dessert they called the Victal Special, which was just fruit puree in a bowl, baby food style. He endured it all with as much grace as he could manage, which was not much. His meetings with Arya were surprisingly productive. She brought Nina and Luca to several of them, which initially made Victal nervous, but he gradually grew accustomed to their presence. They were loud, chaotic, constantly in motion, but they were also curious, friendly, and completely unaware that they had caused an incident that would be referenced in security training for years to come. Nina, in particular, seemed to have decided that Victal was her favorite non-human. Every time she saw him, she would run over, arms outstretched, demanding to be picked up. He resisted at first. Then Arya pointed out that refusing to hold a child who trusted him was actually quite rude. So he started picking Nina up. And then, because Luca looked sad being left out, he started picking up Luca too. It turned out human babies were surprisingly pleasant to hold. Warm, solid. They made happy noises and patted his face and occasionally fell asleep on his shoulder, which Arya explained was a sign of complete trust. You're good with them, she commented during one meeting, watching Victal carefully support Nina while reviewing security protocols on his datapad. I'm simply following proper handling procedures for fragile organisms. You are bouncing her. That is not in any procedure manual. Victal looked down. He was, in fact, gently bouncing Nina on his knee. She was giggling. When had he started doing that? It keeps her calm so we can work, he said defensively. Sure, Arya replied, clearly not believing him. The database updates took 2 weeks. By the end, the security system could distinguish between 30 different species' juvenile behaviors and actual threats. It was comprehensive, detailed, absolutely foolproof. Victal felt genuinely proud of the work. On the final day of the project, Arya brought both twins to his office for one last review session. They had grown comfortable in the security wing, treating it like an extension of their play area. Nina went immediately to Victal. Luca discovered Bip's tail and decided it was the most fascinating thing he had ever seen. All done? Arya asked, settling into a chair while Nina climbed onto Victal's lap and started pressing random buttons on his console. All done, Victal confirmed, gently redirecting Nina's hands away from the emergency alert system. The new parameters are uploaded, tested, functional, no more false alarms. Good. The Admiral will be pleased. She was not thrilled about the tactical team mobilization. I am aware, Victal said dryly. He had received a very pointed message from Admiral Torvin asking him to please save the dramatic security responses for actual emergencies. Nina yawned and leaned against Victal's chest, her energy finally depleted. Within seconds, she was asleep. Luca, having exhausted the entertainment potential of Bip's tale, toddled over and climbed up to join his sister. Soon, both twins were sleeping, draped across Victal like tiny, drooling blankets. "I should move them," Victal whispered. "Do not you dare," Arya said, pulling out her communication device. "This is perfect." "What are you doing?" "Taking a picture for diplomatic records." "That is not what diplomatic records are for." "Fine, for my personal collection. You look very sweet. Bug and the babies." Victal sighed but did not protest. He had learned that humans were impossible to argue with once they had decided something was cute. Bip peered at the sleeping children. They really are quite small, are they not? Hard to believe these caused so much excitement. "Small things often do," Victal said quietly, adjusting his arms so both twins were secure. "That is an important lesson. Not everything that seems threatening is actually dangerous. Context matters. Understanding matters." "Very wise, sir," Bip said, and he actually sounded sincere. Later, after Arya had collected her children and left, Victal sat alone in his office reviewing the day's reports. The station was quiet, peaceful. No alarms, no tactical responses, no roaring babies. He pulled up the picture Arya had sent him. There he was, in full uniform, holding 2 sleeping human infants. He looked uncomfortable, awkward, but also somehow content. His communication device pinged, a message from Grix. "Bug and his cubs, classic." Victal smiled despite himself and saved the picture to his personal files. Some incidents, he supposed, were worth remembering, even the embarrassing ones, especially the embarrassing ones. Outside his window, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the small dramas of the beings living among them. And somewhere on Deck 7, 2 tiny humans were probably roaring at something. Their own reflections, their dinner, the concept of bedtime. It did not matter. They were just babies. And Victal, decorated security officer and reluctant guardian of station safety, had finally learned the difference. 3 months after the incident, Victal received an official commendation for his work improving station security protocols. The updated threat assessment system had prevented false alarms across multiple species, saving resources and reducing unnecessary panic. His methods were being adopted by 12 other stations in the sector. Nobody mentioned that it all started because he mobilized a tactical team for babies. Well, almost nobody. Grix still made roaring noises occasionally. Nina and Luca became regular visitors to the security wing. Nina still called him Bug. Luca had learned to wave and said Vicky, which was close enough. Other station residents grew accustomed to seeing the stern security officer with 2 toddlers attached to his legs during his breaks. Arya thanked him repeatedly for his patience. He insisted it was simply professional duty. She did not believe him. Neither did Bip, who had started keeping emergency snacks specifically for the twins. The observation window on Deck 7 still reflected whoever stood before it, but now the security system recognized the difference between curious children and actual threats, between playful roaring and genuine danger, between chaos and catastrophe. Progress, Victal decided, often came from the most unexpected places, usually small, loud, and covered in crumbs.